When sacrifice becomes a bridge between worlds, broken trust can heal into something stronger than what came before. In the harsh plains of Montana Territory, 1876, a widowed nurse's courage to help 12 dying Apache warriors would challenge everything she knew about bravery, prejudice, and the invisible lines that separate us from those we fear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The blizzard descended without mercy, transforming the Montana landscape into a howling white void. Eleanor Blackwood pressed her back against the cabin door, forcing it shut against the shrieking wind. 3 years on the frontier had taught her the language of storms, how to read the steel-gray sky, how to prepare for the assault of snow and ice that could freeze a person solid in under an hour. But this storm felt different, more vicious, more determined to erase any trace of human presence from the vast wilderness. Eleanor moved to the window, rubbing a clear spot on the frosted glass with her sleeve. Outside, her small garden had vanished beneath deep drifts of snow. The young pine she'd planted when she first arrived, that nearly double, its branches heavy with ice. 3 years of stubborn determination had turned this remote outpost into something resembling a home. 3 years since the war had taken James, leaving her with nothing but memories and a conviction to make his sacrifice matter. The cabin groaned under the storm's fury. Eleanor methodically checked her supplies by the light of her oil lamp. The fort's surgeon had once called her the most prepared woman in the territory, though his tone suggested this wasn't entirely a compliment. She'd stopped caring about compliments the day she'd buried James. As darkness fell completely, the wind shifted, bringing with it an unmistakable sound: horses, multiple riders, approaching through a blizzard that would send even the most experienced frontiersmen seeking shelter. Eleanor froze, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle propped beside the door. Visitors during such weather meant desperation lost travelers, injured hunters, or worse. The territorial papers had been full of stories about increased Apache activity. Just 2 weeks ago, the Johnson homestead 20 miles west had been found burned to the ground, its occupants missing. Tensions were high as cavalry patrols had increased, pushing deeper into lands the Apache considered their own. A sharp knock rattled her door, then silence. Eleanor lifted the rifle, approaching cautiously. "Who's there?" she called, voice steady despite her racing heart. No response came except the wind's howl and another knock weaker this time. She hesitated, weighing risk against conscience. In 3 years of frontier life, she'd learned that caution kept you alive, but isolation hollowed you from within. "I'm armed," she warned, then slowly lifted the bar and opened the door a crack. The sight before her was unexpected. An Apache warrior slumped against her porch post, blood staining the snow beneath him. Behind him, barely visible through the swirling snow, more figures huddled on horseback. She counted at least 10, maybe more. All appeared wounded or severely weakened. Despite her shock, Eleanor's nursing training took over. The man at her door had a gunshot wound to his shoulder, infection clearly setting in. Without treatment, he would die before morning. "You need help," she said, unsure if he understood English. The warrior's dark eyes met hers. "Medicine woman," he replied in accented but clear English. "We seek the widow who heals without asking who stands before her." Eleanor's surprise must have shone on her face. Her reputation had apparently spread beyond the settlers she typically treated. The warrior attempted a grim smile through obvious pain. "I am Running Fox. I have traveled far with my brothers to find the woman who does not turn away those in need." A moment stretched between them, heavy with choice and consequence. Everything she'd been taught warned her to close the door, to protect herself from what the newspapers called the Apache menace. But everything she'd learned as a nurse, as a human being who had seen too much death already, pulled her in the opposite direction. "Bring your wounded inside," she said finally, lowering her rifle but keeping it close. "The storm grows worse." Running Fox nodded once, gesturing to the others. They dismounted with painful slowness, supporting each other as they moved toward her door. In the lamplight, Eleanor saw the full extent of their condition. Gunshot wounds, deep cuts from blades, faces hollow from hunger and exhaustion. They moved with the careful deliberation of warriors accustomed to hiding pain. "Sit," Eleanor instructed, pointing to the floor near her stove. "Let me see your wounds." As they settled, she noted how their gazes swept her cabin, taking in the medical supplies arranged on shelves, the books stacked beside her rocking chair, the photographs of James in his Union uniform. Their assessment was as methodical as hers had been of them. "Your people and mine," Running Fox said finally. "They are not friends." Eleanor placed her rifle in the corner, though still within reach. She filled cups with water and offered them, "Drink slowly. Too much at once will make you sick." "You did not answer," Running Fox observed, taking the cup with hands that trembled slightly. "My people," she replied, turning to gather supplies, "are those who need healing. Now tell me when you last ate." The corner of his mouth twitched not quite a smile, but acknowledgment of her evasion. 2 days. Little before that. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised, and set about preparing a thin broth. Years of wartime nursing had taught her how to treat the starving. Too much food too quickly could kill as surely as no food at all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As she worked, Eleanor continued her assessment, noting the types of wounds, their severity, and which needed immediate attention. Most appeared to be from a recent skirmish rifle wounds primarily, with some cuts from cavalry sabers. "You fought soldiers," she stated, not a question. Running Fox sipped the water carefully. "They attacked our winter camp 3 days ago. Women and children were there. We fought to give them time to escape." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. The newspapers rarely mentioned Apache women and children, describing only hostile warriors being engaged by brave cavalry units. The implication that soldiers had attacked a family camp directly contradicted the official reports she'd read. "Why come here?" she asked, preparing bandages and disinfectant. "Why not seek your own healers?" "Too far," Running Fox replied simply. "And the white woman who lives alone, who treats Mexicans and settlers that army doctors turn away, we have watched. We have seen your heart is not closed like others." The realization that they had been observing her, perhaps for months, was unsettling. She'd treated everyone who came to her door, miners, travelers, Mexican traders, thinking her small acts of compassion went largely unnoticed. The idea that Apache scouts had been witnessing and evaluating her behavior shifted something in her understanding of her place in this territory. "I help you because you need helping," she said finally, the simplicity of the truth settling between them. "Now let me see your wounds." Eleanor worked through the night, moving from warrior to warrior. She extracted bullets, cleaned infected wounds, stitched deep cuts, and set a broken arm. Her supplies dwindled rapidly. She used nearly all her precious carbolic acid, most of her clean bandages, and half her store of laudanum for those in greatest pain. The Apache remained stoic throughout her treatments, barely flinching even during the most painful procedures. They spoke little, but watched her with intense curiosity, particularly when she used medical tools they were unfamiliar with. By dawn, Eleanor was exhausted but satisfied with her work. All 12 warriors had been treated and were resting as comfortably as possible on blankets spread across her floor. The storm continued unabated outside, ensuring they would remain sheltered in her cabin for at least another day. As she washed blood from her hands, Eleanor caught Running Fox observing her. "You have steady hands," he commented, Like our medicine women. I worked in field hospitals during the war, she explained, drying her hands on a cloth. You learn to stay steady when men are dying around you. Running Fox nodded slowly. This war between blue coats and gray coats, it changed paths for many. For all people, Eleanor agreed, surprised by the connection that bridged there. Experiences. She hadn't expected an Apache warrior to understand the profound impact of the Civil War on her life. You lost your man to this war, he observed, gesturing toward James's photograph. Eleanor paused in her work. Yes, Antietam. I was nursing at a field hospital nearby. He died in my arms. She rarely spoke of James's death. Most settlers in the territory avoided the topic, uncomfortable with her grief or simply uninterested. In the war that had seemed so distant from their frontier concerns, Running Fox seemed to hear what she didn't say. Loss follows us like shadows. We decide whether to walk with it or let it consume us. The insight, delivered without sentiment, caught her off guard. There was something in his manner that reminded her of the old hospital director in Washington, a quiet authority, born from having seen too much of life's harshness without becoming harsh himself. Are you a healer among your people? She asked, curious now. He shook his head slightly. I am a warrior who remembers the old ways, the treaties made and broken, the movements of stars and seasons. In your world, perhaps a scout or guide. As the day progressed, Eleanor continued monitoring her patients, changing bandages and preparing more broth as they grew stronger. The storm raged on, isolating them completely from the outside world. In this strange bubble of forced proximity, conversation began to flow more easily between them. One warrior named Stone Hand knew remarkable English, having spent time at a missionary school before returning to his people. He explained how the increased military presence had pushed their band into unfamiliar hunting grounds, leading to hunger and conflict with other tribes as well as settlers. The papers say your people attack homesteads unprovoked, Eleanor said. Seeking understanding, Stonehand's expression darkened. Some bands take revenge for broken promises, for children killed by soldiers, for land stolen. Not all Apache are same, just as not all white men are same. The simple statement challenged everything the territorial papers proclaimed about the Apache problem. These weren't mindless savages, but men with families, with grievances, with their own understanding of the conflict that had engulfed the territory. As night fell again, Eleanor found herself sitting beside Running Fox, who was showing signs of improvement despite the severity of his wound. The fever had broken, and his eyes were clear as he watched her check his bandages. Why did you come west alone? He asked unexpectedly. Many go east seeking easier lives. I came because I was needed, she replied, the well-worn explanation. Feeling insufficient even to her own ears. The truth was more complicated. Grief had driven her as much as purpose. James had died believing in a future where the country's wounds would heal. She'd come west partly to find that future, partly to outrun his ghost. Running Fox seemed to hear what she didn't say. Sometimes the path forward lies in the most difficult direction. Outside, the storm began to subside, the wind's howl diminishing to an occasional moan. The immediate crisis had passed, but Eleanor knew the real challenge was yet to come. Once the weather cleared, decisions would need to be made. Her patients were enemies of the state in the eyes of the army. Sheltering them, healing them, could be seen as treason. Yet looking at the men resting around her cabin, Eleanor couldn't reconcile the humanity she'd witnessed with the barbaric caricatures portrayed in newspapers. These were men fighting for their families, their lands, their way of life, just as James had fought for his beliefs about what America should become. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with bands of gold visible through her frosted windows, Running Fox stirred from his rest, immediately alert despite his weakened state. Your medicine is strong, he observed quietly. My brothers will live because of your hands. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging his gratitude while knowing the real challenges still lay ahead. The storm is passing. You'll need to decide your next steps carefully. Running Fox's expression grew solemn. The army searches for us. If they find us here, they will punish you severely. I know, she replied simply. Why risk yourself for enemies? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Eleanor considered his question carefully. When I took my nursing oath, there was nothing in it about only helping those my government approves of. Suffering is suffering. Pain doesn't change based on who feels it. Running Fox studied her face intently. You would have made a formidable Apache woman, Eleanor Blackwood. I'll settle for being a decent nurse, she replied with a tired smile. Now rest. We'll face tomorrow's problems when they arrive. As the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, Eleanor moved to her window. The world outside was transformed, pristine, beautiful, and deadly in its winter stillness. Somewhere out there, cavalry patrols would be resuming their search as the weather cleared. She had no illusions about the consequences she might face for her actions. In a territory where sympathy for the Apache was tantamount to treason, she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Yet looking at the wounded men she had saved, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced since James died. The simple satisfaction of having done what was right, regardless of consequence. She couldn't know then that this single choice to open her door during a blizzard would set in motion events that would transform not just her life, but the fragile relationship between two peoples balanced on the knife edge of conflict. She couldn't know that within days her small homestead would become the focus of a gathering that would be remembered in stories passed down through generations on both sides of a divide she'd begun to bridge. Eleanor simply knew that she had done what she'd been trained to do: tend the wounded, comfort the suffering, preserve life where possible. The rest would unfold as it would, one moment, one choice at a time. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same steady hands that had stemmed bleeding and sutured wounds through the longest night of her frontier life. The first light of day found Eleanor checking her patients one by one. The 12 Apache warriors were showing remarkable improvement, a testament to their natural resilience as much as her medical care. She changed bandages, applied fresh poultices, and assessed their readiness for the journey that inevitably lay ahead. They couldn't remain in her cabin indefinitely, not with army patrols scouring the territory. Running Fox sat near the window, his keen eyes scanning the pristine white landscape stretching to the distant mountains. "Riders coming," he announced, suddenly, his body tensing despite his injuries. From the east. Eleanor moved quickly to the window, her heart sinking as she spotted the unmistakable silhouettes of cavalry scouts, 3 riders, advancing cautiously through the deep snow. "Army patrol," she confirmed grimly. The cabin erupted into silent, disciplined movement. Warriors gathered their few possessions, helping those most severely injured to prepare for potential conflict. Eleanor raised her hands, commanding their attention. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. It's not large, but it will hide you temporarily." Running Fox shook his head. "We will not bring danger to your door and then hide while you face it. This isn't about honor," Eleanor countered urgently. "If they find you here, they'll arrest me for treason and kill every one of you. The cellar buys us time to think." Stone Hand placed a hand on Running Fox's shoulder. "She speaks wisdom. Live today to fight tomorrow." After a moment's hesitation, Running Fox nodded. Eleanor lifted the concealed trapdoor, revealing narrow steps descending into darkness. The warriors moved with surprising speed despite their injuries, helping each other down the steep stairs. Running Fox was the last to enter. "If they suspect and search," he began. "Then we all face consequences together," Eleanor finished. "But let's try to avoid that outcome." She closed the trapdoor, sliding a heavy trunk over it and quickly rearranging her living space to hide evidence of her numerous patients. Bloodied bandages were burned in the stove, extra bedding stowed away, medical supplies organized to appear untouched. By the time a sharp knock came at her door, the cabin looked as though she'd weathered the blizzard alone. Eleanor opened the door to find Lieutenant James Harrison standing on her porch, snow dusting his uniform and fatigue lining his young face. She had treated the lieutenant for a minor bullet wound months earlier and knew him to be fair-minded, if dedicated to his duty. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "Glad to see you survived the storm unharmed." "Lieutenant Harrison," she responded, keeping her voice casual despite her racing heart. "What brings the cavalry to my doorstep so early?" "Routine patrol, checking on outlying homesteads after the blizzard." His eyes scanned past her into the cabin. "And tracking a band of Apache warriors. We engaged them before the storm hit, wounded several, but they escaped. Any chance you've seen signs of them?" Eleanor shook her head, maintaining steady eye contact. "I've been snowbound for 2 days, Lieutenant. Haven't seen anyone." Harrison studied her face, perhaps sensing something not quite right. "Mind if we come in briefly, warm up before continuing our search?" She hesitated just long enough to seem natural before stepping aside. "Of course, I've coffee on the stove." The lieutenant entered, followed by one of his men while the third remained outside with their horses. Eleanor poured coffee with hands she forced to remain steady, acutely aware of the 12 wounded warriors hidden mere feet below the floorboards. "Quite a storm," Harrison commented, warming his hands around the mug. "Worst I've seen since coming to the territory." "Indeed," Eleanor agreed. "I was fortunate to have adequate supplies." The lieutenant's companion, a corporal whose name she didn't know, moved around the cabin with obvious suspicion, noting the excessive number of dirty dishes in her wash basin, the depleted medical supplies on her shelves. "Been treating someone, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked abruptly. Eleanor met his gaze directly. "Myself, Corporal. Cut my hand quite badly while chopping firewood yesterday." She displayed a genuinely bandaged palm and actual injury sustained while treating the warriors. Lieutenant Harrison seemed satisfied with this explanation, but the corporal continued his inspection, his boot heels striking the floorboards with deliberate force as he moved. Eleanor's heart nearly stopped when he paused directly over the trapdoor, now hidden beneath the heavy trunk. "Something interesting about my floor, Corporal?" she asked, injecting just the right note of irritation into her voice. "Just seems like you've rearranged your furniture recently," he replied, eyeing the trunk suspiciously. "The storm left me with little to do but clean and reorganize," she countered smoothly. "A woman alone finds ways to occupy herself during blizzards." Lieutenant Harrison drained his coffee and set the mug down. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough, Mrs. Blackwood. Thank you for the coffee." He turned to the corporal. "Jenkins, we're moving out." The corporal hesitated, clearly reluctant to abandon his suspicions, but military discipline prevailed. As they prepared to leave, Harrison paused at the door. "One more thing, Mrs. Blackwood. Colonel Bridges has ordered all civilians to report any Apache sightings immediately. The band we're tracking attacked a supply wagon 3 days ago, killed 2 soldiers." Eleanor nodded soberly. "I understand my duty, Lieutenant." "I hope you do," Harrison replied, his tone carrying a subtle warning. "Some folks in the territory have confused sympathies. Colonel Bridges has authorized harsh measures against anyone found aiding hostiles." "I'm a nurse, Lieutenant," she stated firmly. "My only sympathy is for the wounded and suffering, regardless of who they are." Something in her words caused Harrison to study her more carefully. "That's an admirable sentiment in peacetime, Mrs. Blackwood. Less practical during an Indian war." After they departed, Eleanor watched from her window until the patrol disappeared from sight. Only then did she move the trunk and open the cellar door. The warriors emerged silently, their expressions a mixture of relief and grim understanding of their precarious situation. "They will return," Running Fox stated with certainty. "The one with suspicious eyes will convince the lieutenant." Eleanor nodded, knowing he was right. "You need to leave as soon as possible." "We cannot travel far in this condition," Stonehand observed, gesturing to the most severely wounded among them. "And the snow makes tracking simple for Army scouts." Eleanor paced the small cabin, considering their limited options. "There's an abandoned mine shaft about 5 miles north, in the foothills. Settlers avoid it because of a cave-in 2 years ago, but the entrance tunnel remains intact. You could shelter there while you recover your strength." Running Fox exchanged glances with the others before nodding agreement. "We will need supplies. Food, water, bandages." "I'll prepare what I can," Eleanor promised. "But you'll need to leave at nightfall. Use the darkness to cover your tracks as much as possible." The hours passed in tense preparation. Eleanor gathered what supplies she could spare: dried meat, beans, coffee, bandages, and medicines, knowing she would struggle to replace them before spring. The warriors fashioned improvised snowshoes from broken barrel staves and rawhide straps, essential for traversing the deep drifts without leaving obvious trails. As dusk approached, Eleanor checked each warrior's wounds one final time, providing specific instructions for their continued care. When she reached Running Fox, he grasped her hand gently. "You risk much for those your people call enemies," he said quietly. "Why?" Eleanor considered his question carefully. "My husband believed that how we treat our enemies defines us more than how we treat our friends. It's easier to be kind to those who are kind to us. The true test comes when facing those we've been taught to fear or hate." Running Fox nodded slowly. Wise words. "Among my people, we say that a person's spirit is revealed not in times of plenty, but in times of hardship. Then we understand each other better than either of our peoples might expect," Eleanor replied with a tired smile. As darkness fell completely, the warriors prepared to depart. Each man thanked her in his own way, some with words, others with solemn nods of respect. Stonehand presented her with a small carved stone pendant on a leather cord. "Protection," he explained simply, "from those who watch over travelers between worlds." Eleanor accepted the gift, touched by the gesture. "Be careful," she cautioned, as they filed silently out the door. "The mine entrance is hidden behind a stand of pines. Look for 3 rocks stacked beside the trail." Running Fox was the last to leave. He paused at the threshold, studying her face in the lamplight. 3 days, he said cryptically. "Watch for our return." Before she could question his meaning, he was gone, a shadow melting into the darkness. Eleanor secured her door and moved to the window, watching as 12 dark figures disappeared into the night-shrouded forest. She had no illusions about the risk she'd taken or the potential consequences that might follow. If anyone discovered she had treated Apache warriors and helped them escape, the territorial authorities would show little mercy, especially with tensions running so high. Yet despite the danger, she felt a profound certainty that she had done the right thing. James would have understood. He had fought and died for a vision of America where principles mattered more than prejudice, where compassion wasn't limited by arbitrary boundaries of race or politics. The next morning brought no respite from worry. Eleanor went about her chores with one eye constantly on the eastern approach, expecting Lieutenant Harrison's return at any moment. By midday, her fears were realized when not just Harrison, but a full patrol of 8 mounted soldiers appeared on the horizon, led by a figure she recognized with dread: Colonel William Bridges himself. Colonel Bridges was known throughout the territory for his ruthless efficiency in dealing with what he termed the Apache problem. He had overseen the forced relocation of 3 Apache bands the previous summer, an operation that had resulted in dozens of deaths, including women and children. His presence at her isolated cabin could mean only one thing: serious suspicion. Eleanor smoothed her apron, checked that the evidence of her Apache patience was well hidden, and stepped onto her porch to meet whatever was coming. Mrs. Blackwood. Colonel Bridges called as they approached, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man accustomed to unquestioning obedience. "I trust we find you well after the storm." "Colonel," she acknowledged with a nod. "To what do I owe this considerable military attention?" Bridges dismounted, handing his reins to a corporal, the same suspicious-eyed man from yesterday's. "Patrol, Corporal Jenkins has raised some concerns about your situation here. Mind if we step inside and discuss them?" It wasn't really a request. Eleanor led them into her cabin, maintaining a calm demeanor despite her racing heart. Inside, Bridges removed his gloves and surveyed her living space with calculating eyes, while 4 soldiers took positions around the small room. "You live quite isolated out here, Mrs. Blackwood," he observed. "Most women would find it intimidating." "I'm not most women, Colonel," she replied simply. "And I provide an essential service to scattered homesteads that can't reach the fort's doctor." Bridges nodded, pacing slowly around her cabin. Laudable work. Which makes certain inconsistencies all the more troubling. He paused by her medical cabinet. "Corporal Jenkins noted your supplies seemed unusually depleted yesterday. Almost as if you'd treated multiple patients recently." Eleanor maintained steady eye contact. "I used considerable supplies during the storm to restock my medical kits and prepare for spring. Blizzards provide rare, uninterrupted time for such tasks." "I see," Bridges murmured, unconvinced. He moved to her stove, where a pot of stew simmered. "Cooking for one, yet enough food for several men." "I prepare meals in advance during winter," she countered. "Practical on the frontier, as I'm sure your scouts would confirm." The colonel's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Blackwood, let's dispense with these explanations. Multiple moccasin tracks were found leading to and from your cabin, partially obscured by snow, but visible to experienced trackers. Tracks made during or immediately after the blizzard." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. She had hoped the fresh snowfall and nighttime departure would have hidden such evidence. "Colonel, furthermore," he continued relentlessly, "blood traces were found on your porch steps. Too much to be explained by a simple cut-on. Your hand." The soldiers were watching her intently now, hands near their weapons. Eleanor realized denials would only make her situation worse. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I had visitors during the storm." Colonel Bridges' eyebrows rose slightly at her unexpected honesty. "Apache warriors?" "Wounded men," she corrected. Deliberately, who needed medical attention. The colonel's face darkened. "Men who attacked a supply wagon and killed 2 soldiers under my command. Men who claimed they were defending their families against an attack on their winter camp," Eleanor countered, then immediately regretted revealing so much. "Ah," Bridges nodded as if she'd confirmed his worst suspicions. "So they fed you their version of events, and you not only believed them, but provided aid and comfort to enemies of the United States Army." Eleanor straightened her spine, decision already made. "I provided medical care to wounded human beings, as my nursing oath requires. Their politics, their race, their conflicts, none of that is relevant to a healer's duty." The cabin fell. Silent as her words hung in the air. Even the soldiers seemed taken aback by her boldness. Colonel Bridges studied her with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant respect. "Where are they now?" he demanded. "Gone," she replied simply. "I treated their wounds and they left during the night." "Their direction?" Bridges pressed. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I cannot say." "Cannot or will not?" he challenged. "Does it matter, Colonel?" "The result is the same." Bridges' face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Blackwood, you stand on the precipice of being charged with treason, a capital offense. Your only hope for leniency is complete cooperation." Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. I understand the consequences, Colonel. But I will not help you hunt wounded men I have treated. That would violate everything I believe in as a nurse and as a human being. Your principles may cost you your life, Bridges warned. Then so be it, she replied quietly. Some principles are worth dying for. My husband understood that when he gave his life at Antietam. The invocation of her husband's sacrifice in the Civil War caused Bridges to hesitate. As a career military man, he respected martial devotion, even if he found her current stance infuriating. Lieutenant Harrison, he barked finally. Post men around this property. No one approaches without my direct approval. He turned back to Eleanor. Mrs. Blackwood, consider yourself under house arrest pending formal charges. When the Apache return, and they will return for someone who has helped them, will be waiting. After the colonel and most of his men departed, leaving 2 soldiers to guard her cabin, Eleanor sat heavily in her rocking chair, the full weight of her situation settling upon her shoulders. She had no illusions about the military justice awaiting her. At best, imprisonment. At worst, execution as a traitor during wartime. Yet regret remained elusive. Each time she questioned her choices, she remembered the wounded men she had saved. Their dignity in suffering, their gratitude expressed not in words, but in the solemn respect with which they had treated her. Whatever happened next, she had remained true to the principles that defined her life's work. Running Fox's parting words echoed in her mind. 3 days. Watch for our return. What had he meant? Surely he wouldn't lead his warriors back to a cabin now, under military guard. Yet something in his tone had suggested certainty, a plan already formed in his mind. The day passed slowly, Eleanor permitted to continue her household tasks under the watchful eyes of the guards outside. They allowed her to fetch water, feed her chickens, and bring in firewood, but her movements were closely monitored. As darkness fell, she lit her lamps and prepared a simple meal, setting aside portions for the soldiers at her door, a gesture that seemed to confuse them but which they accepted gratefully in the bitter cold. Night descended, bringing with it a bone-deep silence. Eleanor tried to sleep, but found herself too agitated, her mind racing with fears and possibilities. Near midnight, she moved to her window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape where one guard remained visible while the other presumably sheltered in her small barn. A slight movement at the forest's edge caught her attention. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks, but then she saw it again, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness, followed by another and another. With growing amazement, Eleanor counted at least 20 figures moving silently through the snow, encircling her property with practiced precision. These were not Running Fox's wounded warriors. They moved too fluidly, too confidently for men recovering from serious injuries. These were fresh fighters, armed and advancing with tactical discipline that would have impressed even Colonel Bridges. Before she could process what was happening, swift action erupted in the moonlight. The guard by her door was seized silently from behind. A hand clamped over his mouth before he could raise an alarm. Similar movement near the barn suggested the second guard had met the same fate. Within moments, a soft knock came at her door. Heart pounding, Eleanor opened it to find Running Fox standing on her porch, no longer wounded and weak but straight-backed, and adorned with symbols of authority she hadn't seen before. Behind him stood warriors in full ceremonial dress, their faces painted for what she recognized as a significant occasion rather than battle. "You've recovered," she whispered, astonished by his transformation. "I was never as badly wounded as I appeared," Running Fox admitted. "Our deception was necessary to test your heart." "Test me?" Eleanor repeated, confusion giving way to understanding. "You mean you weren't really—" "Some wounds were real," he clarified. "Others exaggerated to see if you would help enemies at great risk to yourself. You exceeded all expectations, Eleanor Blackwood." Before she could respond to this revelation, Running Fox gestured behind him. The soldiers live, only sleeping. We must move quickly. Colonel Bridges returns at dawn with reinforcements to arrest you formally. How could you know that? She asked, bewildered. We have ears in many places, he replied simply. Even among those who serve the blue coats. Now you must choose remain and face their punishment, or come with us. Go with you? Eleanor repeated, the implication staggering. Where? To a place between worlds, Running Fox answered. Where those who bridge divisions can find sanctuary until this war burns itself out. Others are their healers, teachers, those who refused. To choose hate over humanity, you would be welcomed. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, gazing past him at the assembled warriors. The choice before her was momentous. Abandon everything she had built. Her identity among the settlers for an uncertain future among people considered enemies of her nation. Yet remaining meant certain punishment for actions she could not bring herself to regret. I need to gather some things, she said finally, decision made. Running Fox nodded. Only what you can carry. We travel fast and far before dawn. Within minutes, Eleanor had packed her essential medical supplies, James's photograph, and a few personal items. As she prepared to leave her cabin for what might be the last time, she paused at the door, looking back at the small space that had been her home for 3 years. So much grief and healing had happened within these walls. So much loneliness and, most recently, purpose. It will be here if you ever wish to return, Running Fox said, reading her thoughts. We do not burn. Bridges we may need to cross again. Outside, one of the warriors brought forward a horse, a magnificent paint mare, adorned with symbols Eleanor didn't recognize. Running Fox helped her mount, explaining, She is called One Who Crosses Boundaries in our language. A fitting companion for a healer who does the same. As they prepared to depart, Eleanor looked toward the sleeping guards, concerned. They won't be harmed by the cold. They will wake at first light, unharmed but confused, Running Fox assured her. By then, we will be far beyond their reach. The procession moved silently into the forest, 20 warriors and 1 frontier nurse, leaving behind footprints that would soon be covered by the gentle snowfall that had begun to descend from the night sky. Eleanor rode beside Running Fox, still processing the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Why go to such elaborate lengths? She asked quietly as they traveled. The deception, the wounded warriors, all to test one woman? Running Fox was silent for a moment before answering. Because bridges between worlds are rare and precious, Eleanor Blackwood. Those who can stand in both realities, who can see humanity where others see only enemies, such people may determine whether peace ever becomes possible. As they crested a ridge, Eleanor looked back one last time at her cabin, now a tiny square of darkness in the vast white wilderness. She couldn't know then that her small homestead would become the focus of legend on both sides of the conflict. For settlers, a cautionary tale of a woman who betrayed her kind. For the Apache, a story of hope that compassion could transcend the artificial boundaries of race and politics. She couldn't know that 3 years later, when the Apache Wars finally ended, her name would be among those who helped build the first tentative foundations of understanding between peoples, who had viewed each other only through the distorting lens of fear and hatred. Eleanor simply knew that she had followed her healer's calling to its logical conclusion, that suffering knew no borders, that compassion couldn't be contained by arbitrary lines on maps or differences in appearance. As the horizon welcomed the first hints of dawn, she rode forward into an uncertain future, guided by the surest compass she possessed, the oath she had taken to heal rather than harm, to preserve life rather than destroy it. Behind them, snow continued to fall, gradually erasing all evidence of their passing. The journey through the snow-blanketed wilderness seemed to Eleanor both endless and strangely dreamlike. For 3 days, the Apache band traveled northward into increasingly rugged terrain. following hidden trails and obscure passages that no white settler had likely ever traversed. They moved primarily at night, resting during daylight hours in concealed camps established with practiced efficiency. On the fourth morning, as dawn painted the eastern sky with bands of lavender and gold, they crested a final ridge. The vista that spread before them took Eleanor's breath away. Nestled within a protected valley, ringed by steep cliffs and dense pine forests, lay a settlement unlike any she had imagined existing in the territory. "Welcome to Shadow Valley," Running Fox said quietly, noting her astonishment. "What your people would call a sanctuary." Eleanor stared in wonder. The settlement consisted of perhaps 30 dwellings, some traditional Apache wickiups, others log cabins built in settler style, and several structures that seemed to blend both architectural approaches. Smoke rose from cook fires, children played in cleared areas, and people moved about with the relaxed purpose of a community at peace. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "The Army claims to know every Apache camp in the territory." Running Fox smiled slightly. "The most secure hiding place is often one your enemy believes cannot exist. This valley appears on no maps. The approaches are known only to those we trust." As they descended into the valley, Eleanor noticed something even more surprising than the settlement itself. Among the predominantly Apache inhabitants moved several figures who were unmistakably white or Mexican. A bearded white man worked alongside Apache women at a tanning rack. A Mexican woman tended garden plots with indigenous techniques. A white woman who appeared to be teaching a group of children, both Apache and white, looked up and waved at their approach. Running Fox led the procession into the center of the settlement, where their arrival drew curious but not alarmed attention. People emerged from dwellings, conversations paused, and children gathered to watch the newcomers. An elderly Apache man with long silver hair and a face deeply lined by time approached, his bearing regal despite his obvious age. "My grandfather, Gray Wolf, who speaks with thunder," Running Fox introduced him with evident respect. "Elder of Shadow Valley and keeper of the old ways." Gray Wolf studied Eleanor with piercing dark eyes that seemed to look through rather than at her. "So this is the healing woman who opened her door when others would close theirs," he said in perfect English. "Your courage has been spoken of around our fires." Eleanor dismounted, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after days of hard travel. "I only did what any nurse would do," she replied modestly. "No," Gray Wolf contradicted gently. "What any nurse should do, perhaps. But few would risk what you risked for those society-named enemies." Before Eleanor could respond, the white woman she had noticed teaching approached, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Another healer, thank the heavens. I'm Sarah Thorne, former missionary doctor, until I developed confused sympathies, as the Army calls it." The woman extended her hand, which Eleanor shook gratefully, relieved to find another woman of similar background in this unexpected place. "Eleanor Blackwood, former Army nurse until, well, yesterday, I suppose." Sarah laughed, a bright sound that seemed to lighten the solemnity of the moment. "Your journey mirrors many of ours. Come, you must be exhausted. Let's get you settled, and then we can talk properly." As Gray Wolf called for a welcoming ceremony to be prepared for that evening, Sarah led Eleanor to a small but comfortable cabin near the eastern edge of the settlement. Inside, Eleanor found it furnished simply but adequately, a bed with clean linens, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. "This was Jacob Carter's place," Sarah explained. "Former cavalry lieutenant, who couldn't stomach the massacre at Whitewater Creek last summer. He left 2 months ago to make contact with other sympathetic military officers. We've spaces for those who choose to join our community." Eleanor set down her meager belongings, still processing the reality of this hidden settlement. "How many, like us?" Sarah finished for her. 12 whites, 7 Mexicans, and about 60 Apache at present. Some stay permanently, others pass through when needed. Grey Wolf established this place 3 years ago when it became clear that peaceful coexistence on the outside was becoming impossible. And the army never found it? Eleanor asked, astonished. There have been close calls, Sarah admitted. But the valley's natural defenses make it nearly impenetrable without guides who know the hidden approaches. Besides, no one looks for what they don't believe exists, a place where Apache and white live together by choice. After washing away the grime of travel and changing into clean clothes Sarah provided, Eleanor found herself seated at the communal fire that evening, honored as a special guest at the welcoming ceremony. She watched, fascinated, as Grey Wolf led rituals that blended traditional Apache practices with elements that seemed deliberately inclusive of the non-Apache residents. Running Fox, now dressed in ceremonial attire that marked his status as a leader among his people, explained the proceedings quietly as they unfolded. My grandfather believes that the old ways must adapt or die. That rigid adherence to tradition can become a prison rather than a protection. A progressive view. For an elder, Eleanor observed, surprised. He has seen more change in his lifetime than most, Running Fox replied. When he was a boy, no white man had ever set foot in these mountains. He has witnessed the world transform around him and chose to transform with it rather than merely resist. The ceremony culminated with Grey Wolf presenting Eleanor with a beautifully crafted medicine pouch adorned with intricate beadwork, depicting symbols of healing from both Apache and European traditions. The caduceus intertwined with native healing plants. The path of the healer crosses all boundaries, Grey Wolf proclaimed as he placed it around her neck. For pain speaks a language all humans understand, and those who ease suffering build bridges between worlds. In the days that followed, Eleanor gradually integrated into the rhythm of Shadow Valley. She joined Sarah in the settlement's small but well-equipped medical lodge, combining her formal nursing training with Sarah's missionary medicine and the traditional healing knowledge of the Apache medicine women. This collaboration quickly proved more effective than any single approach might have been alone. One morning, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor found herself working alongside Night Blossom, an Apache healer of considerable reputation, treating a young settler boy suffering from a respiratory infection. The child had been brought to Shadow Valley by his desperate father after territorial doctors had given up hope for his recovery. Night Blossom prepared a steam treatment using pine needles and specific herbs while Eleanor monitored the boy's pulse and breathing. The combined therapy Western diagnostic techniques with indigenous botanical knowledge had already shown remarkable improvement in the child's condition. Your hands remember what your mind does not yet know, Night Blossom observed as they worked. They recognize the healing path even when it looks different from what you were taught. Eleanor considered this insight, realizing how quickly she had adapted to approaches that would have seemed foreign or even primitive to her colleagues at the Army hospital. Perhaps healing isn't about the path we take, but the destination we seek, she replied thoughtfully. Night Blossom smiled, pleased with her response. This is why Grey Wolf says you belong here. You see beyond the surface of things. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Eleanor stepped to the door to find Running Fox returning with a small scouting party, their expressions grave. They headed directly to Grey Wolf's dwelling for a council that was quickly convened. Curious and concerned, Eleanor joined the gathering of settlement leaders. Colonel Bridges has launched a major operation, Running Fox reported once everyone had assembled. 6 cavalry companies with Apache scouts from rival bands. They're conducting a systematic sweep of the mountains, destroying any camps they find. Looking for us specifically? Asked the former lieutenant, Jacob Carter, who had returned 2 days earlier from his mission. For any Apache not on the reservation, Running Fox clarified. But they have Eleanor's description as well. Bridges has declared her a traitor with a bounty for her capture. Eleanor felt a chill despite the warmth of the council fire. She had expected consequences for her choice, but the reality of being hunted by her own government was still disorienting. "They cannot find Shadow Valley," Grey Wolf stated with quiet certainty. "The approaches are too well hidden, and winter makes the high passes impassable." "Perhaps," Running Fox acknowledged. "But they've never committed this many resources before, and they've employed Black Knife as their primary scout." A murmur of concern rippled through the gathering. Eleanor had heard of Black Knife, an Apache warrior who had chosen to serve the army against his own people, renowned for his almost supernatural tracking abilities. "If anyone can find the hidden paths, it would be Black Knife," admitted Stone. Hand, who had also been among those Eleanor had treated. He was taught by Grey Wolf himself before he turned against the old ways. The council deliberated long into the night, weighing options and contingencies. Some advocated temporarily dispersing into smaller groups to reduce the risk of discovery. Others argued for standing firm, trusting in the valley's natural defenses and their preparations for just such a threat. Throughout the discussion, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn into the strategic planning. Her perspective as someone who understood army procedures proved invaluable. By the time Grey Wolf called for a decision, she was no longer an outsider, but an integrated member of this improbable community. "We stay," Grey Wolf announced finally. "But we prepare for the Binton. Worst while hoping for the best. Double the scouts on all approaches. Move the children and elders to the cave sanctuary. And accelerate our contingency preparations." As the council dispersed, Running Fox approached Eleanor. "Walk with me," he invited, leading her along a path that wound through the sleeping settlement to a promontory overlooking the valley. In the moonlight, Shadow Valley resembled a dream, peaceful, protected, improbable in its very existence. "When I first found you during the blizzard," Running Fox said after a contemplative silence, "I did not tell you the complete truth." "About testing me?" Eleanor asked. "You explained that already." "No," he shook his head slightly. "About why we sought you specifically. Your reputation for treating anyone who needed help regardless of origin. This was known. But there was more." Eleanor waited, sensing the importance of what he was about to reveal. 3 summers ago, a cavalry patrol found a small Apache family, a mother, grandmother, and 3 children gathering berries near the Johnson Creek settlement. The soldiers. He paused, the memory clearly painful. They acted as soldiers. Sometimes do when they believe no witnesses exist. Eleanor felt sick, understanding the implication without needing details. "But there was a witness," Running Fox continued. "A young nurse traveling between homesteads happened upon the scene. She intervened at great personal risk, bandaging wounds, confronting the patrol leader, demanding the family be released rather than taken to the fort where they would likely die trying to escape. As the reports often state, I remember." Eleanor whispered, the memory surfacing with painful clarity. "The patrol lieutenant was furious. He threatened to arrest me for interfering with military operations." Running Fox nodded. "The mother was my sister. The children my niece and nephews. The grandmother told us of the white healing woman who stood between them and death, who treated their wounds and shamed the soldiers into leaving them alive." Eleanor stared at him, stunned by this connection she had never suspected. "I never knew what happened to them afterward." "They found their way back to our band," Running Fox said. "And their story became known among all Apache. The healing woman who saw people, not enemies. When tensions increased and we needed to test whether bridges between our peoples were still possible, you were the one Grey Wolf said we must approach." First, the revelation settled over Eleanor like a mantle, both burden and honor. Her impulsive act of basic human decency years earlier had set in motion events that ultimately led to her current place in this hidden valley, among people who now looked to her as part of their community's leadership. "What happens now?" she asked, gazing out over the moonlit settlement. "We defend what we have built here," Running Fox replied simply. Not just the physical place, but the idea it represents that another way is possible, even in times of bitter conflict. The next several weeks brought increasing tension to Shadow Valley. Scout reports confirmed that Army patrols were methodically searching the mountains, working their way gradually closer to the hidden sanctuary. The winter weather provided some protection, with heavy snowfalls making the highest approaches impassable. But Black Knife's tracking skills remained a constant concern. Eleanor threw herself into preparations, working with Sarah and Nightblossom to establish a field hospital in the cave system that served as the settlement's final refuge. They stockpiled medicines, prepared bandages, and developed treatment protocols that combined their diverse medical knowledge. The community's response to the threat revealed its remarkable cohesion. Former enemies worked side by side with absolute trust. Apache warriors trained white settlers in wilderness survival techniques. Jacob Carter drilled everyone in defensive tactics should the worst occur. Children were taught by Sarah and other educators in the relative safety of the caves while maintaining a semblance of normalcy. One evening, as Eleanor cataloged their medical supplies, she was surprised by a visit from Grey Wolf. The elder rarely left his dwelling during winter, his ancient bones protesting against the cold. "Walk with me, healing woman," he requested, using the title that had become her identity among the Apache residents. Despite her concern for his comfort, Eleanor accompanied him through the settlement to a small rise where a single ancient pine stood sentinel against the night sky. Grey Wolf seated himself on a boulder, gesturing for her to join him. "When I was a young man," he began without preamble, "my father told me that the greatest strength comes not from resisting change, but from directing it. The river does not fight the mountain. It finds a path around, wearing away stone over time until the very landscape transforms." Eleanor listened, sensing this was not merely an old man's reminiscence, but a message he felt urgent to convey. "Shadow Valley was never meant to be merely a hiding place," Grey Wolf continued, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "It is a seed planted in difficult soil, a possibility preserved until the season turns." "You believe the conflicts between our peoples will end?" Eleanor asked. Grey Wolf's weathered face creased in a smile. "All conflicts end, healing woman. The question is what grows from the ashes." He gestured toward the settlement below. "Here, we demonstrate an alternative to endless cycle of violence and retribution. Here, we remember that beneath the artificial divisions of race and politics lies our common humanity." His words resonated deeply with Eleanor, articulating what she had intuited, but never fully formulated. Shadow Valley wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a prototype, a living example of coexistence that defied the prevailing wisdom of inevitable conflict. "You have found your true purpose here," Grey Wolf observed, studying her face in the moonlight. "Not merely healing bodies, but helping heal the breach between peoples." "I'm just a nurse," Eleanor demurred, uncomfortable with the weight of his words. "No," Grey Wolf contradicted gently. "You are a bridge builder, as is my grandson. As are all who refuse to accept artificial boundaries as natural law." Before Eleanor could respond, a warning call echoed across the valley, 3 short whistles followed by a long one, the signal for an approaching visitor. Grey Wolf rose with surprising agility for his age. "It appears our conversation must continue another time," he said calmly. "Duty calls us both." By the time they reached the central gathering area, Running Fox had already organized a response team. "Single rider approaching from the North Ridge," he reported. One of Black Knife scouts separated from his patrol during the storm. "He must not reach the valley," Stonehand insisted, checking his rifle. "And if we kill him, his absence will draw the entire patrol to search this area," Running Fox countered. "We need another solution." Eleanor stepped forward, an idea forming. "Let me speak with him." All eyes turned to her in surprise. "Hear me out," she continued quickly. If he's separated from his patrol, he's likely cold, possibly injured or lost. I can approach as a fellow lost traveler, a nurse making her rounds between homesteads, caught in the storm. Running Fox shook his head. Too dangerous. Your description has been circulated to all patrols. Most scouts have never seen me, Eleanor argued. They know to look for a woman traveling with Apache, not a lone nurse treating a lost soldier. Gray Wolf raised his hand, silencing further objections. Eleanor's plan has merit. If she can misdirect the scout away from our valley, it buys us time without raising alarms. After further debate, a compromise was reached. Eleanor would approach the scout, but Running Fox and 2 warriors would shadow her, ready to intervene if the situation turned dangerous. She changed into her original traveling clothes, took her medical bag, and prepared to intercept the approaching rider before he discovered any of the hidden approaches to Shadow Valley. The plan worked better than anyone anticipated. Eleanor found the scout a young Apache, man no more than 20, struggling with a horse that had gone lame in the difficult terrain. Her appearance as a concerned nurse, offering assistance, disarmed his suspicions, particularly when she demonstrated her medical knowledge by treating his frostbitten fingers. "You're far from any settlement," she observed casually as she wrapped his hands in clean bandages. "Patrol gets separated in the storm?" The young man nodded, grateful for the treatment. "Looking for hostiles in these mountains. And a white woman trader who helps them." "Sounds dangerous," Eleanor commented, keeping her expression neutral. "Which direction was your patrol heading?" "Southwest," he replied without hesitation. "Following Black Knife. He thinks there's a big camp hidden somewhere in these mountains." Eleanor nodded sympathetically while inwardly celebrating this vital intelligence. Black Knife was leading them away from Shadow Valley, not toward it. "The nearest settlement is Johnston's Creek, about 15 miles east of here," she said, deliberately pointing him away from the valley. "Your horse won't make it, but you can if you follow the stream downhill. Tell them Nurse Eleanor sent you. They'll give you shelter until you can rejoin your patrol." The young scout thanked her profusely, clearly relieved to have found help in the wilderness. After he departed, following her directions, Running Fox emerged from his hiding place. "Well done," he said admiringly. "You've bought us precious time and valuable information." "It won't last forever," Eleanor cautioned as they made their way back to the valley. "Sooner or later, Black Knife will realize he's been misled. By then, winter will have strengthened its grip," Running Fox replied. "Even Black Knife doesn't challenge these mountains during the deep freeze." Eleanor wasn't entirely convinced, but the immediate threat had been averted. As they approached the hidden entrance to Shadow Valley, she paused, looking back at the vast wilderness that had become both her refuge and her purpose. "Gray Wolf said something earlier," she mused, "about Shadow Valley being a seed rather than merely a hiding place. What did he mean?" Running Fox considered her question carefully before answering. "My grandfather believes that what we build here, this community where different peoples live together in mutual respect, will outlast the current conflicts. That when the fighting eventually ends, the example we've set will help shape what comes after. Is that possible?" Eleanor asked, thinking of the deep hatred she had witnessed on both sides. "Look at us," Running Fox gestured between them. "Nurse and warrior, white and Apache, standing as equals, as—" He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation, "as friends. If this is possible between us, why not between others?" The word friends seemed inadequate for what had developed between them, but Eleanor let it stand, recognizing the careful boundaries Running Fox maintained. In the weeks since her arrival at Shadow Valley, their relationship had evolved into something complex and undefined. Mutual respect certainly, deepening trust undoubtedly, but also an unspoken awareness of each other that transcended simple categorization. As they re-entered the valley, Eleanor was struck anew by the improbable beauty of what had been created here. Not just the physical settlement, but the community itself. Apache children played alongside white and Mexican children, learning each other's languages and customs naturally. Meals were shared communally, blending culinary traditions. Medical knowledge was exchanged freely between practitioners of different healing approaches. It was, as Grey Wolf had suggested, a prototype of what might be possible on a larger scale if people could move beyond fear and prejudice to recognize their common humanity. And Eleanor had somehow found herself not just participating in this experiment, but helping to shape it. That night, as she wrote in the journal she had begun keeping since her arrival, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place. From grieving war widow to frontier nurse to supposed traitor to community leader, each transition had seemed impossible until it happened. Perhaps that's the lesson, she wrote by lamplight. The boundaries we believe to be fixed and impermeable are often more fluid than we imagine. The divisions we accept as natural are frequently artificial constructs that serve someone's purpose. And occasionally, in the most unlikely places, we discover that crossing those boundaries leads not to danger, but to unexpectedly rich new terrain where we find our truest purpose. Outside her cabin window, snow began to fall again, adding another protective layer to Shadow Valley's natural defenses. Eleanor watched the flakes swirl in the lamplight, no longer seeing them as harbingers of isolation, but as temporary guardians of this fragile, precious experiment in human connection across seemingly insurmountable divides. A soft knock at her door interrupted her writing. She opened it to find Running Fox, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, his expression simultaneously resolute and uncertain. "The council wishes to speak with you," he said. "They have made a decision about your role here that requires your presence." Eleanor set aside her journal and followed him into the snowy night, toward whatever new boundary awaited crossing. The council fire burned brightly in Grey Wolf's lodge, casting dancing shadows on the faces of those gathered there. Eleanor took her place in the circle, nodding respectfully to each member. Besides Grey Wolf and Running Fox, the council included Nightblossom, Sarah Thorne, Jacob Carter, Stone Hand, and 2 Apache elders Eleanor knew only by their ceremonial names. Grey Wolf opened the meeting with a brief prayer in Apache, then switched to English for Eleanor's benefit. "The winter grows deeper, and with it, our need for clarity about the path ahead. Black Knife scouts may have been temporarily misdirected, but spring will bring renewed threats." Jacob Carter nodded. In agreement. Colonel Bridges won't abandon his search easily. He's built his reputation on subjugating the Apache. A hidden valley where whites and Apache live together peacefully undermines everything he represents. Which is precisely why Shadow Valley must endure, Grey Wolf stated with quiet certainty. Not merely as a refuge, but as living proof that another way is possible. He turned his penetrating gaze to Eleanor. "You came to us as a healer of bodies. In the months since, you have demonstrated wisdom that heals divisions between peoples as well. The council has reached a decision that concerns you directly." Eleanor felt a flutter of apprehension. Despite her integration into the community, she sometimes still felt like an outsider, someone who had stumbled into this hidden world rather than helping to create it. "We wish to establish formal diplomatic contact with certain sympathetic figures in the territorial government," Grey Wolf continued. "People who might help protect Shadow Valley's future through official recognition, however limited." Running Fox leaned forward. "Such contact carries enormous risk. The messenger must understand both worlds intimately, Apache ways and white politics. They must be beyond suspicion while simultaneously commanding respect from both sides." The implication of their words dawned on Eleanor slowly. "You want me to be this messenger?" Grey Wolf nodded solemnly. "You are uniquely positioned for this task. As a widow of a Union soldier, your patriotism cannot be easily questioned. As a nurse, your humanitarian motivations appear natural, and your actions have proven your commitment to justice that transcends arbitrary boundaries. There's more, added gently. Judge William Morrison in Silver Creek has been quietly opposing Colonel Bridges' more extreme measures. His daughter fell ill last autumn with a wasting disease that territorial doctors couldn't treat. An Apache remedy might save her life. You want me to bring this remedy to the judge's daughter, Eleanor surmised, and while there, open diplomatic channels. Only if you choose this path freely, Grey Wolf emphasized. The journey would be perilous. Despite your skill at misdirecting the scout, your description has been circulated. Bridges has declared you a traitor with a price on your head. Eleanor absorbed this sobering reality. The safety of Shadow Valley had almost made her forget that in the eyes of territorial authorities, she was now an outlaw. Venturing back into settled areas would mean risking capture, imprisonment, perhaps even execution. Yet the opportunity to secure some form of protection for this remarkable community compelled consideration. If Judge Morrison could be persuaded to extend even unofficial recognition or protection to Shadow Valley, it might ensure the settlement's survival when tensions eventually eased. When would I leave? She asked finally. With the first thaw, Running Fox answered. When passes clear enough for travel, but before full spring brings increased patrols. You would not go alone. I would guide you through the wilderness portions of the journey. Eleanor noted the concerned glances exchanged by other council members. Running Fox, as Grey Wolf's grandson and a recognized war leader, was risking as much as she by venturing into territories where he would be immediately identified as Apache and likely shot on sight. We have until then to prepare, Grey Wolf concluded. To craft our message, gather the medicines, and train you both in what you must know to succeed. Consider carefully before giving your answer, Eleanor Blackwood. No one will think less of you if you choose to remain safely here. After the council dispersed, Eleanor walked alone through the sleeping settlement, weighing the enormity of what had been asked of her. The logical part of her mind catalogued the risks: capture, imprisonment, death. Yet another part, perhaps, the same part that had opened her door to wounded Apache during a blizzard, recognized this as the natural extension of the path she had chosen months ago. She found herself at the promontory overlooking the valley, where stars hung impossibly bright in the clear mountain air. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her, and she turned to find Running Fox approaching. I thought you might come here, he said, stopping beside her. It helps to look at the valley from above when making difficult decisions. Is that why you come here? She asked. Sometimes. He gazed out over the settlement. Other times to remember what we're fighting to protect. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Eleanor found herself acutely aware of his presence. Beside her, steady, resolute, a source of strength she had come to rely upon more than she had realized. If I agree to this mission, she said finally, and you accompany me, you'll be in far greater danger than I will. The army would execute you immediately if captured. Running Fox turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the starlight. Some risks are worth taking, Eleanor Blackwood. Why? She asked simply. Why risk everything for this chance? For the same reason you opened your door during a blizzard, he replied. Because occasionally we must stake our lives on the possibility of a better world than the one we've inherited. His answer resonated within her, articulating the instinct that had guided her actions since James's death. In a world so full of hatred and division, perhaps the most revolutionary act was to demonstrate that another way was possible, even at great personal cost. I'll do it, she decided, the words feeling right as soon as they were spoken. Not because I believe we'll succeed, but because we must try. Running Fox nodded, something like approval warming his usually guarded expression. Grey Wolf says that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more. "Your grandfather is a wise man," Eleanor observed with a small smile. "Yes," Running Fox agreed. "Now don't tell him I said so." His wisdom already borders on insufferable. The unexpected humor surprised a laugh from Eleanor, the sound bright in the cold night air. It struck her that this was perhaps the first glimpse she'd had of the man beneath. The warrior's carefully maintained discipline, a glimpse of who Running Fox might have been in a world without the conflicts that had shaped them both. The next 6 weeks passed in intensive preparation. Eleanor's medical duties continued, but each day also included hours of specialized training for the dangerous mission ahead. Jacob Carter coached her on military protocols and how to avoid army patrols. Sarah helped her craft a plausible cover story, explaining her absence from territorial settlements. Night Blossom taught her how to prepare and administer the complex herbal remedy for Judge Morrison's daughter. Most importantly, Grey Wolf and the council developed the diplomatic message she would carry, a carefully worded proposal outlining how Shadow Valley might receive limited recognition as a protected sanctuary where peaceful coexistence could be demonstrated, potentially serving as a model for future relations after the current conflicts ended. "We ask not for sovereignty," Grey Wolf explained as they finalized the document, "but for a small space where the possibility of peace can be preserved until the wider world is ready to consider it." Throughout these preparations, Eleanor worked closely with Running Fox, who would guide her safely through the wilderness between Shadow Valley and Silver Creek. They studied maps, planned routes, established contingencies for various dangers they might encounter. Each day spent in his company deepened her respect for his intelligence, courage, and unwavering commitment to his people's future. Their relationship remained strictly professional, maintained within careful boundaries by unspoken mutual agreement. Yet Eleanor increasingly found herself aware of moments when those boundaries seemed to waver, a glance held too long, a hand offered in assistance that lingered, conversations that extended beyond their practical purpose into more personal territory. One evening, as they reviewed their planned route by lamplight in Eleanor's cabin, Running Fox paused in his explanation of a particularly dangerous mountain pass. "You've never asked why I agreed to this mission," he observed unexpectedly. Eleanor looked up from the map spread between them. "I assumed you volunteered because of your tracking skills and knowledge of the territory." "Those were Grey Wolf's reasons for approving my participation," Running Fox acknowledged. "Not my reasons for volunteering." "Then why?" she asked, genuinely curious. He considered his words carefully before answering. "When you treated our warriors during the blizzard, you crossed a boundary few whites would consider crossing. When you chose to come with us rather than face army punishment, you crossed another. Each crossing demonstrated courage that commands respect." He traced a line on the map abstractedly. "My people have a saying that those who walk between worlds carry special responsibility and face special dangers. Such journeys should not be made alone." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that Eleanor found herself unwilling to examine too closely. Instead, she nodded, accepting his explanation at face value while sensing there was more left unspoken. As winter gradually loosened its grip on the mountains, signs of approaching spring began to appear. Snow melted from south-facing slopes, revealing patches of green. Streams swelled with runoff, their ice covering cracking and dissolving. Birds returned from southern migrations, filling the dawn with song. With these changes came the knowledge that their departure could no longer be delayed. The lower mountain passes would soon be clear enough for travel, but also clear enough for increased army patrols searching for elusive Apache bands. The night before their planned departure, the entire community gathered for a ceremony combining elements of Apache spiritual tradition with Christian and Mexican religious practices, a syncretism that had evolved naturally in Shadow Valley's unique environment. Prayers and blessings were offered in 3 languages, united by the common hope for the mission's success and the traveler's safe return. After the formal ceremony concluded, Individual farewells followed. Sarah embraced Eleanor tightly, pressing a small Bible into her hands. For appearances, she explained with a wink, and perhaps occasionally for comfort. Night Blossom presented her with additional medicines carefully wrapped in leather pouches. For the judge's daughter, and for any others you may encounter who need healing. Jacob Carter gave her detailed notes on Army patrol schedules and routes, information gleaned from his contacts among sympathetic soldiers. Memorize these, he instructed, then burn them before you leave the valley. When Eleanor approached Grey Wolf to receive his blessing, the old man took her hands in, his weathered ones studying her face intently. You have found your true purpose here, he said quietly. Whatever happens on this journey, remember that Shadow Valley now lives within you. You carry our hopes, but also our strength. The gravity of his words settled over her like a mantle. In the months since her arrival, Eleanor had indeed been transformed from fugitive to community member to diplomat, carrying the future of an entire settlement on her shoulders. The responsibility was enormous, yet she felt strangely equal to it, supported by the training and trust invested in her. Dawn broke clear and cold on their departure day. Eleanor dressed in her original frontier clothing, now carefully modified to blend more easily among territorial settlements. Her medical bag contained the precious remedy for Judge Morrison's daughter, while the diplomatic message from Grey Wolf was sewn into the lining of her coat, along with Jacob's military intelligence. Running Fox waited for her at the Valley's hidden entrance, similarly transformed from his usual appearance. Gone were the distinctive Apache garments and adornments, replaced by the clothing of a Mexican guide, a disguise that might allow him to travel more safely through white settlements. "Ready?" he asked simply as she approached. Eleanor nodded, adjusting the pack on her shoulders. "As ready as possible." They set out just as the sun crested the eastern mountains, bathing the landscape in golden light. Neither looked back. At Shadow Valley, as they began their descent, both understanding that sentiment could not be afforded on this journey. 4 days of hard travel lay ahead before they would reach the outskirts of Silver Creek, each day bringing increased danger as they moved closer to settled territories. The first 2 days passed without incident, their route taking them through the most isolated regions of the mountain range. Running Fox led them along game trails and ancient Apache pathways invisible to untrained eyes, avoiding areas where Army patrols might be operating. They traveled by day and made cold camps at night, unwilling to risk fires that might attract attention. On the 3rd day, as they descended into the foothills where forests began giving way to scattered ranchlands, Running Fox's demeanor changed subtly. His vigilance intensified, every sense alert to potential danger. By midday, he called a halt. In a protected ravine. "Riders ahead," he announced quietly. "Army patrol moving north along the creek line." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "Can we avoid them?" Running Fox studied the terrain thoughtfully. "Not easily. They're between us and our planned route to Silver Creek." He considered for a moment. "We have 2 options: wait for them to pass, which delays us but may be safer, or adjust our course southward through higher risk territory." "What makes it higher risk?" Eleanor asked. "It borders ranchlands owned by the Miller brothers." He explained grimly. "Known Apache hunters who collect territorial bounties. They patrol their property aggressively." Eleanor weighed their options. Delay meant spending another night exposed in increasingly settled country. The alternative meant potential confrontation with civilians known for shooting Apache on sight. "If we take the southern route," she asked, "can you pass as Mexican convincingly enough?" Running Fox nodded. "If we're not examined too closely. I speak the language fluently." Decision made, they altered their course, moving south through increasingly open country. Eleanor felt exposed after days in the protective cover of forests and mountains. Here, scattered stands of juniper and Pinnan provided only intermittent concealment as they paralleled a ranch road at a cautious distance. By late afternoon, they had successfully navigated around what Running Fox identified as Miller property, bringing them within a half-day's journey of Silver Creek. As they paused to rest in the shelter of a dry wash, Eleanor felt a cautious optimism. They had avoided the Army patrol, circumvented the dangerous ranchlands, and were now positioned to reach Judge Morrison's residence by the following afternoon. The sudden crack of a rifle shattered her hopeful thoughts. A bullet struck the ground near Running Fox, spraying dirt across his boots. Before either could react, voices called from the ridge above them. That was a warning shot. Next one won't miss, Indian. Eleanor looked up to see 3 mounted men on the ridge, rifles trained on their position. The Miller brothers, she presumed, somehow alerted to their presence despite their precautions. Running Fox moved with lightning speed, pushing Eleanor behind the limited protection of the wash bank while drawing his own weapon. "Run," he ordered quietly. "I'll hold them here." "I'm not leaving you," she hissed back, reaching for the small Derringer concealed in her medical bag. "This is not a debate," Running Fox countered. "The mission matters more than either of us. Judge Morrison must receive the remedy and the message." Before she could argue further, the men on the ridge began descending toward them, spreading out to surround their position. Running Fox fired a shot that caused them to momentarily seek cover, buying precious seconds. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name for perhaps the first time. "Shadow Valley's future depends on you reaching Silver Creek. Everything we've built, everything we hope to build, it all comes to nothing if you're captured or killed here." The truth of his words struck her forcefully. Personal loyalty warred with broader responsibility. The lives of everyone in Shadow Valley, including Running Fox's family and Gray Wolf himself, depended on the diplomatic mission succeeding. "Silver Creek lies due east, less than 10 miles. Running Fox continued urgently. "Follow the creek bed after dark. You can reach the judge's house by morning." Another shot from the ranchers ricocheted off stone nearby. Their attackers were closing in, using the terrain for cover as they advanced. "I'll find you after," Running Fox promised, though both knew the words might be empty. "Now go, while I can still give you a head start." Eleanor made her decision, hating every aspect of it, but recognizing its necessity. She gripped Running Fox's arm briefly, words failing her, then turned and ran crouching along the wash as he provided covering fire behind her. The sound of gunshots faded as she put distance between herself and the confrontation, but their echoes seemed to follow her through the gathering dusk. Each step away from Running Fox felt like a betrayal, yet each also carried her closer to completing the mission they had both committed to, securing some form of protection for Shadow Valley and the remarkable experiment in coexistence it represented. Night fell, bringing both concealment and new dangers. Eleanor navigated by starlight, following the creek as Running Fox had instructed, stopping occasionally to listen for pursuers. Hours passed with no sign of either the Miller brothers or Running Fox. The absence of both brought its own kind of torment. Had he escaped? Been captured? Or worse? Near midnight, exhausted but determined, she caught sight of distant lights, the outskirts of Silver Creek. Civilization, with all its comforts and dangers, lay just ahead. Eleanor paused to compose herself, checking that her appearance wouldn't immediately raise suspicions. Then, medical bag clutched tightly in hand, she approached the town she had left months earlier as a respected nurse, and to which she now returned as a suspected traitor. Dawn found her standing before an imposing 2-story house on Silver Creek's main street, Judge Morrison's residence. Eleanor had waited through the night's final hours, knowing that approaching in darkness might trigger alarm. Now as the town began stirring to life, she climbed the steps and knocked firmly on the front door. A housekeeper answered, eyeing her travel-worn appearance with suspicion. "I need to see Judge Morrison immediately," Eleanor stated with quiet authority. I have medicine for his daughter. My name is Eleanor Blackwood." The housekeeper's eyes widened in recognition. The nurse who disappeared during the winter storms? There were rumors you'd been killed by Apache. "As you can see, those rumors were exaggerated," Eleanor replied steadily. "Please inform the judge that I've brought treatment for Emily's condition." Within minutes, she was ushered into a well-appointed study where Judge William Morrison rose from behind his desk, surprise evident on his distinguished features. "Mrs. Blackwood, your appearance is unexpected, to say the least. Colonel Bridges has circulated some rather disturbing claims about you." "I'm sure he has," Eleanor acknowledged. "But I'm here about your daughter, not politics. I've brought medicine that may help her condition when other treatments have failed." The judge's expression shifted, personal concern overriding official suspicion. "Emily has grown worse. The doctors say there's little hope." He studied Eleanor intently. "This medicine, where did you obtain it?" "From those who understand this land and its healing plants better than any territorial doctor," she answered truthfully, if incompletely. "I've seen it work on similar cases." Judge Morrison's internal struggle played across his face, official duty versus a father's desperate hope. "And what do you want in exchange for this treatment?" "Only the chance to explain my actions," Eleanor replied. "And perhaps when your daughter improves, your willingness to hear a proposal that could reduce bloodshed in the territory." After a moment's consideration, the judge nodded. Emily first, politics after. The next several hours were devoted to treating the judge's 17-year-old daughter. Eleanor administered the first dose of Night Blossom's complex herbal remedy, explaining the regimen that would follow. By evening, the girl's fever had noticeably diminished, the first positive sign in months, according to the relieved family. As promised, Judge Morrison then granted Eleanor a private audience in his study. With the door firmly closed, she recounted her experiences since the blizzard, the wounded Apache, her choice to help them, her flight from Army retribution, and, most importantly, the discovery of Shadow Valley with its remarkable experiment in peaceful coexistence. "You expect me to believe that whites, Mexicans, and Apache are living together harmoniously?" the judge asked skeptically. "When the entire territory is engulfed in violence between these very groups?" "I don't ask you to believe," Eleanor countered, producing Gray Wolf's carefully worded document from its hiding place. "I invite you to verify for yourself once conditions permit. In the meantime, this proposal offers a foundation for what might become a model for future relations throughout the territory." Judge Morrison read the document slowly, his judicial mind evaluating its implications. "This Gray Wolf suggests establishing Shadow Valley as a neutral sanctuary, recognized unofficially by territorial authorities, while remaining independent of reservation system constraints." "Precisely," Eleanor confirmed. "A place where peaceful coexistence can be demonstrated rather than merely discussed. Where different approaches to governance, medicine, education, and community can be tested without interference." "Colonel Bridges would consider this treason," the judge observed, though his tone suggested he might not share that assessment. "Colonel Bridges represents a military approach that has failed to bring peace for decades," Eleanor replied. "Perhaps it's time to consider alternatives that don't rely exclusively on force and subjugation." Their discussion continued late into the night, moving from political concerns to philosophical questions about the territory's future. Eleanor was surprised to discover that Judge Morrison had long harbored private doubts about military tactics against the Apache, viewing them as counterproductive and ultimately unsustainable. "Force creates resistance," he mused at one point. "Each campaign breeds new generations committed to fighting back. We've been caught in this cycle since I first came to the territory 20 years ago." By morning, a tentative agreement had been reached. Judge Morrison would use his considerable influence to shield Shadow Valley from direct military action, classifying the region as under judicial review for potential reservation designation, a bureaucratic designation that would effectively prevent Colonel Bridges from operating there without explicit gubernatorial approval. In exchange, Grey Wolf and the Shadow Valley Council would document their governance systems, healing practices, and educational approaches, providing the territorial authorities with valuable insights that might inform future policy. This compromise fell short of official recognition but offered a degree of protection previously unimaginable. "This must remain confidential," the judge cautioned as they finalized terms. "If word reaches Bridges prematurely, he'll move against the valley immediately, regardless of my judicial designation." "Understood," Eleanor agreed. "When can I return to inform the council?" Judge Morrison considered carefully. "Emily's treatment will require your supervision for at least 2 weeks. After that, I can arrange for a territorial marshal, one I trust implicitly, to escort you back to the general vicinity. Your guide would need to meet you from there." The mention of a guide brought Running Fox sharply back to Eleanor's thoughts. His fate remained unknown, a painful uncertainty she had forced herself to set aside while focusing on the diplomatic mission. "There's one more thing," she said hesitantly. "My companion, an Apache disguised as a Mexican guide, was intercepted by the Miller brothers during our journey here. I need to know what happened to him." The judge's expression grew grave. "The Millers brought in an Apache prisoner yesterday, claiming a bounty. He's being held at the territorial jail pending transfer to Fort Adamson." Eleanor's heart contracted painfully. "He must be released. He acted as my guide under promises of safe passage." "That's beyond my authority," Judge Morrison replied regretfully. "Once a prisoner is in military custody, only Colonel Bridges can authorize release." "Then our agreement means nothing," Eleanor stated flatly. "Shadow Valley will never trust territorial promises if one of their leaders is executed while under supposed diplomatic protection." The judge paced his study, weighing competing principles of law, justice, and pragmatism. "There may be a way," he said finally, "not officially sanctioned, but potentially effective." Over the following days, as Eleanor continued treating Emily, Morrison, whose improvement accelerated with each dose of the Apache remedy, a careful plan took shape. Judge Morrison made arrangements with the town sheriff, his brother-in-law, and political ally to facilitate what would officially be recorded as an escape attempt, but in reality would be a carefully orchestrated release. 2 weeks after her arrival in Silver Creek, with Emily Morrison well on the road to recovery and diplomatic arrangements secured, Eleanor found herself waiting in the pre-dawn darkness behind the territorial jail. Her heart pounded as she watched the back door open slightly, then widen to admit a shadowy figure. Running Fox emerged, moving stiffly but under his own power. His face showed evidence of rough treatment, a healing cut above one eye, bruising along his jaw, but his eyes remained alert and defiant. "You succeeded," he said simply upon seeing her, no surprise in his voice. "Did you doubt it?" Eleanor asked, unable to suppress her relief at seeing him alive. "Never," he replied with quiet certainty. "I knew you would complete the mission. Then find a way to free me rather than return to Shadow Valley alone." His faith in her moved Eleanor deeply. In the weeks of forced separation, she had come to recognize what she had perhaps known, but not acknowledged for months, that her connection to Running Fox had grown beyond respect or friendship into something more profound, more complicated, and potentially more dangerous for them both. Now was not the time to examine those feelings. They had miles to cover before daylight fully revealed their escape. Judge Morrison's trusted marshal would meet them at dawn at the eastern edge of town, escorting them partway back towards Shadow Valley before losing them in the wilderness, maintaining plausible deniability while fulfilling his part in their arrangement. As they moved silently through the sleeping town, Eleanor summarized her diplomatic success, explaining the protection Judge Morrison had agreed to provide and the documentation Shadow Valley would need to prepare in exchange. Grey Wolf will Be pleased, Running Fox observed. This exceeds what we hope to achieve. It's only a beginning, Eleanor cautioned. Unofficial protection dependent on one man's influence. All great changes begin small, Running Fox replied. Like seeds that appear insignificant until they break through stone. They reached the rendezvous point just as first light touched the eastern horizon. The marshal, a taciturn man named Blackburn, who clearly knew more than he officially acknowledged, provided them with horses, supplies, and a route that would avoid both army patrols and the Miller brothers' property. 4 days later, travel-worn but triumphant, they approached the hidden entrance to Shadow Valley. Scout sentries had spotted them miles out, sending runners ahead with news of their return. By the time they entered the valley proper, the entire community had gathered to welcome them home. Gray Wolf stood at the forefront, his ancient face alight with pride as Eleanor and Running Fox dismounted before him. The mission succeeded, he stated rather than asked, reading the answer in their bearing. Beyond our expectations, Eleanor. Confirmed, presenting the official documentation, Judge Morrison had provided papers that would help shield Shadow Valley from military intervention while establishing a framework for potential broader recognition in the future. That night, a celebration unlike any Eleanor had witnessed brought the entire settlement together in joyous recognition of what had been achieved. Apache drums mingled with Mexican guitars and settler fiddles in an improbable harmony that somehow worked despite its disparate origins, much like Shadow Valley itself. As the festivities continued around the central fire, Eleanor found herself drawn to the quiet promontory overlooking the valley. The stars seemed especially brilliant as if acknowledging the rare human triumph unfolding beneath their eternal gaze. Footsteps in the darkness announced Running Fox's approach. He joined her silently, his presence familiar and essential in a way she had stopped questioning. Gray Wolf says you've been offered permanent leadership role in the council, he said. After a comfortable silence, recognition of what you've achieved for the valley. Eleanor nodded. I accepted. And Judge Morrison's offer to return to Silver Creek as his daughter's permanent nurse, with full pardon for any alleged crimes against the territory. She turned to face him fully, surprised he knew of this private offer. I declined. Running Fox studied her face in the starlight. Why? It would have been a safe return to your world. Not my world anymore, Eleanor replied simply. My place is here now, helping build something that matters more than personal safety or comfort. Something shifted in Running Fox's carefully maintained expression, a barrier lowering. A decision made. When I was captured by the Millers, he said quietly, I had time to consider what I most regretted. Not my capture, not even potential execution. What then? Eleanor asked, drawn by the unusual vulnerability in his voice. That I had maintained unnecessary distance between us, he answered. Out of concern for propriety, for complications, for a dozen reasons that seemed important, but dissolved when facing death. Eleanor felt her breath catch, hope and uncertainty warring within her. And now? Now I understand that boundaries between people can be as artificial as boundaries between cultures, Running Fox replied, moving closer. Sometimes they protect, but often they merely separate what should be joined. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Eleanor thought of all they had survived together, from that first blizzard meeting to diplomatic missions behind enemy lines. Each challenge had deepened their connection, building something neither had sought, but both now recognized as rare and precious. Gray Wolf says that courage isn't the absence of fear, Eleanor quoted softly, but the decision that something else matters more. Running Fox's smile was barely visible in the darkness. My grandfather has occasional moments of wisdom. When he finally closed the remaining distance between them, it felt to Eleanor like the natural conclusion of a journey begun months earlier when she opened her cabin door during a blizzard. Two people from worlds at war, finding in each other not an enemy but a companion, a partner. Eventually, a love that defied every convention and boundary their societies had established. Later, as they rejoined the celebration, Eleanor observed the community with new eyes, not as an outsider who had found refuge, but as someone who had helped secure its future. Children of different backgrounds played together, without consciousness of the divisions that separated their peoples outside this protected valley. Elders from opposing traditions shared stories and wisdom rather than hatred and suspicion. It was, as Grey Wolf had described it, a seed small and vulnerable, but containing within it the possibility of transformation that extended far beyond its physical boundaries. The diplomatic agreement she had secured might someday grow into more formal recognition, perhaps eventually into a model for coexistence throughout the contested territories. Or perhaps not. The future remained uncertain, with forces of division and hatred still powerful throughout the region. But for tonight, in this improbable sanctuary created through courage and vision, Eleanor Blackwood, once frontier nurse, now diplomat, healer, and bridge builder, allowed herself to believe in possibilities that had seemed impossible less than a year before. The widow who had nursed 12 Apache warriors back to health had received a gift beyond measure in return, not just silver medallions or ceremonial honors, but a community, a purpose, a love, and most precious of all, hope for a world where boundaries between peoples might someday be recognized for what they often were, artificial constructs that separated what belonged together. As dawn approached, with celebrations finally winding down, Eleanor stood with Running Fox at the edge of the gathering. Grey Wolf joined them, his ancient eyes reflecting firelight and wisdom accumulated across decades of conflict and change. The hardest boundaries to cross, the old man observed quietly, are those we build within ourselves, the walls that separate what we've been taught from what we know to be true. Eleanor thought of her journey from grieving widow to frontier, nurse to outlaw to diplomat, each transition requiring her to abandon old certainties for new understanding. Those boundaries can only be crossed through experience, she replied, through knowing those we've been taught to fear. Grey Wolf nodded approvingly. This is why Shadow Valley matters. Not just as refuge, but as proof, as living demonstration, that what seems impossible is merely untried. Running Fox placed his hand over Eleanor's, a public acknowledgement of what had begun as private recognition, and as reminder that hearts, like maps, can be redrawn when courage permits. Together, they watched the sun rise over Shadow Valley, illuminating what human vision and determination had created against impossible odds. A community that defied the certainties of its time, that insisted on demonstrating another way forward. When violence and separation dominated the world beyond its boundaries, Eleanor knew challenges remained ahead. The protection she had secured was fragile, dependent on one judge's influence and the continued secrecy of the valley's location. Colonel Bridges still hunted Apache bands throughout the territory, and sentiment among many settlers remained hostile to any accommodation or coexistence. Yet in this moment, watching dawn light spread across the valley where people from 3 supposedly irreconcilable cultures lived in harmony, Eleanor felt something she had not experienced since losing James, a bone-deep certainty that her life served a purpose worth any risk or sacrifice, that the bridges she had helped build between worlds might someday extend beyond this hidden valley, connecting humanity across the artificial divides that caused so much suffering. It would be a long journey, with setbacks and struggles inevitable. But as Grey Wolf often reminded them, even the longest journey begins with a single step, or sometimes with opening a door during a blizzard to those you've been taught to fear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.